it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics. Just look at this adorable Halloween tote. This is called Chills and Thrills. It's a glow-in-the-dark trick-or-treat bag. All of the things that are white, the little ghosts, the bones, the skulls, are glow-in-the-dark. Inside the bag, this cute little lining that has these eyes, also glow-in-the-dark. I thought it was just such a fun project when the kids are out trick-or-treating. They have a bag they're excited about. It holds lots of candy. And of course, the glow-in-the-dark is just fun for everybody. We have this available as a kit in limited quantities, of course. These seasonal fabrics are not out very long before they're discontinued. The next generation of fabrics comes through. So I wanted to show you how fun and easy it is to make bags, and in particular this bag. Most of my experience, and perhaps some of your experience, or most of your experience, is quilting. And so I'm not as comfortable making bags, but I wanted to take the mystery out of that and show you just how fun and easy it is to make. And sometimes it's nice to do something different than quilting. So inside your kit, if you'll be purchasing your kit, you'll be getting the Chills and Thrills pattern. Now this will be available as a free download on the Shabby Fabrics homepage. At the very bottom, click on free downloads and you'll find that pattern there. Now it can be done with really any fabric because it's basic components of making a bag, but of course it's really sweet in these Halloween fabrics. As we work our way through the pattern in the very beginning, it'll let you know, if you're getting this kit, what you'll be cutting your main theme fabric out to. And one of the things I wanted to just throw in there is one of the instructions they have is they're going to be fussy cutting. If that's a new term for you, fussy cutting is basically strategically cutting fabric exactly where you want it to be cut versus just cutting it and it yields whatever that strip will give you. So fussy cutting is definitely getting a specific part of the fabric, and they start off with this particular piece. And we've cut these two strips ahead of time. This is considered our fabric A. These are cut to 9.5 by 18.5, and that will be listed in your download for this pattern, so you don't need to write that down. But what I want to point out is inside the pattern, it says cut 1/4 inch above the orange stars. So this is our orange star right here, and we simply laid our ruler in on top of there and cut 1/4 inch above that. They mentioned above the stars and 2¼ inches below the tombstone border. We weren't exactly sure what they considered the tombstone border to be. It ends up being that it included the stripe, but the main thing I want you to know is once you start your first cut, which is 1/4 inch above the orange stars, then just measure down to 9.5 inches and make your cut. We found that a little bit easier than trying to guess what's the 2¼ inches below the tombstone border, because that was a little bit vague for us. So we have those two pieces cut out. The other thing I love about the kit that we've included is there is enough, if you do make an error, cutting error on one of those strips, you have one more shot at that. You have a third one that you could fussy cut. So it's always nice to have a little bit of fabric available if you do make a cutting error. So that's our fabric A. Fabric B and fabric C are, so this is the main portion of the lower portion. Fabric B is here and fabric C is here. Per our instructions, and again, I won't go over those measurements because they're already in your download available for you. We're simply going to sew these together just like this. So I would pin. We take that to the side and this one to the side. And we'll go right sides together. Let's pin that, and we're going to go to our sewing machine. I'll be using a standard 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you'll be doing this 2 times. For the front of the bag and the back of the bag are identical. So that's why you have 2 of everything. Front and the back of the bag are exactly the same. So we'll sew this 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then after that's done, we'll simply come back and we'll do the same process where we're pinning, and we'll sew that together so that's now a unit. I'll go ahead and demonstrate this first one, get that done. I'll pin it, sew the top piece together, and then once I come back from that, we'll put the fusible fleece on the back of that. But let's just start off. I'm going to go ahead and take the bag out of the way, and let's get started. Okay, so our first portion is done, and per our pattern, so that's A is the big piece, B is what we just sewed on, and then C, which is the top stripe, I'll sew that on in the same fashion. I'm going to open this up, and I like to press seams open, especially what I'm going to be putting on the back of this will be the fusible fleece, and I don't want to bump here. So when in fact, let me just show you that step. I'm going to preset that seam with some heat. Move that over so you can see that. And I have to tell you, early in my kind of quilting experience, I didn't used to set seams. And I'm finding now that when I get a seam nice and warm, it's more pliable to do what I want it to do in the very next step. And so I consistently set seams now, warm them up, and it just seems that the seam is now more pliable to do what I want it to do. And I think that's kind of true. Whenever something is warmer, it's more flexible, and therefore more willing to go in the direction that we want it to go. So that's pressing the seam open. I'll now go pin that stripe to that, and that's our C strip. Again, right sides together, I'll pin that, I'll preset that seam, press the seam open, and I'll repeat the exact same 3 pieces sewn together for the back side of the bag. When I come back, those will be done and we'll be ready to go to the very next step. So I've sewn both halves, now have the 3 pieces joined so they're one unit. The pattern has you cut your fusible fleece to be this exact size. So we'll go ahead and place that fusible fleece if you've not used that before. And by the way, that's included in your kit, has the bumpy side. That's got the glue. So you want to make sure your seams lay nice and flat. They don't roll on you as you lay this down. You'll position that exactly over the top there. And if you cut your fusible fleece, if you didn't cut it exactly right, you'll be able to trim that up in the very end here before we sew the bag together. So I think that's exactly where we want that. I don't see any of our fabric poking out. We just double check from this side. That looks good to me. And it looks like we did cut our fusible fleece just a little bit bigger, and we'll be able to trim that up. Like with any fusible product, you do need to leave the iron in position for a period of time. I always recommend starting in the middle of the project versus on the side because it can kind of creep across the project. So I like to press versus do this motion of ironing. That also eliminates distortion. Because if I start doing this, I start twisting this fabric. And that's not helpful. And I can definitely twist it out of shape. I think we've got that nice and adhered to. I sometimes like to lift this up and make sure I didn't miss a spot. If you did, just go heat it up again, get that down. Now in the pattern, this is where they say you get to quilt this part. And that would be true, of course. I've done the other one ahead of time where I also have the fusible fleece on the back. Couple ideas, something to think about. You might want to just run a straight stitch down the actual ditch. It's called stitching in the ditch. And I've done that actually on this other piece here. Now I can't, hey, that was good. I can't even tell which one I did. I didn't even change my thread, but I think using an orange thread or a black thread would be better. I did go ahead and use my my white thread that I was doing for piecing, and I just stitched in the ditch. And it's just a way to kind of attach this piece to the back, but you could do all over quilting. You could do a lattice design, drawing some lines this way and that way, anything you want. So just have fun with that portion. Once they're both quilted, now keep in mind they both have fusible fleece, this is the top of the bag. We'll go right sides together, we'll pin that, and we're gonna sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance along the two sides and across the bottom. Be sure to leave the top of the bag open. And I'm using the Clover patchwork pins. I love them, they go beautifully. They're so sharp that they go easily through the product without disturbing the product. I've used wider gauge needles before, pins, and they work okay, but their diameter is about 3 times as thick, and it almost leaves almost a little bit of a hole. It does iron out, but it tends to disturb my fabric, and I love how these just go in, and there's no interruption, no disturbance of the fabric whatsoever. We'll use a standard 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let's go over to that sewing machine and we'll get that done. And we're going to be doing the same exact steps with the lining. Now the lining is just one piece of fabric, so you'll just be taking the 2 lining pieces, right sides together. You'll be sewing along the 2 sides and across the bottom. So I'm going to go do this step with you on the sewing machine now. When I come back, I will have the lining done as well, so I can take you to the next step. When I'm about a 1/4, I'm going to stop and I'm going to pivot. There we go. So the main part of the bag is sewn together. The lining fabric, as I mentioned, is going to be the same footprint as this because it's going to be going inside there, so it's logical it's the same. We're going to sew it along the 2 sides and across the bottom. However, with the lining fabric, we need to leave a 4-inch opening to turn through. So let's grab our 2 lining pieces. As I mentioned, we're going to sew the same, but let's go ahead and mark where we're going to leave that opening so that we don't forget to do that. And it's about a 4-inch opening. If you want a slightly bigger opening, that's fine. There's nothing magic about that. Wouldn't get less than 4. You have a lot of bulk turning through that. So 4 inches. I'll pin that. I will do this off camera. Now anytime you have an opening, because the bag will be turning through in that location or whatever project you're doing, you want to make sure that when you stop here, you stop and you backstitch over that and you reinforce. And when you begin again, you start sewing and you backstitch because that's the stressing point of the bag as it turns through. Sometimes I forget that, and as I turn it through, I can see the stitches starting to, they're under stress and they begin to let go, and some of my stitching comes undone, and that's not productive. All right, I'll sew this up and I will be back and we're going to finish our bag. So I've got my lining fabric done, I have my main fabric done, and now we're going to do something called box the corners. If you're not familiar with that, let me show you actually how easy that is. The instructions have us coming in 2 1/4 inches from the sides and 2 1/4 inches up from the bottom. So basically we're just making a square. We'll be using our small 2.5 by 6.5 inch ruler. This is a handy little ruler here. So I'm going to go ahead and measure 2 1/4 from the side and 2 1/4 up from the bottom. Double checking my measurements twice. I will be cutting this fabric away. I'm going to use my friction pen to just draw that square. Now make sure this is the up portion. I have to admit, it's very easy to turn these projects around in the midst of doing everything. I always want to double check that's my top so I don't inadvertently box the wrong side. Again, 2 1/4 inches in from the side, 2 1/4 inches up from the bottom. Let's mark that. And now we're going to cut that. Now you're cutting through quite a bit. I don't want to use a rotary cutter. I almost always use a rotary cutter. It's sharp, I'm comfortable with it, but I could overshoot that line. So in this instance, I'm going to be using the scissors, some good strong scissors. This is the Clover Bordeaux scissors. They're sharp. I love these for things like this. Cutting wool, anything thicker, I love using these particular scissors. They're super sharp. They also come with a kind of a leather. When you're done with those, put them in here. I like that because they are quite sharp. If you have them in a bag, they could potentially poke through the side of a bag. So I love that Clover has thought that all the way through and given us a little protective case to store them in when they're not in use. All right, so that part's all done. We can discard those corner pieces. And this is where the boxing comes in. The actual, what do you do with this now? So on the overhead camera, hopefully you can see how now I have a seam here and a seam here. You might even want to open those up with your fingers. You might want to use the iron to open up that seam. Otherwise, it can get quite bulky in this area. Some people use a wider seam allowance. Whatever you do with the bag, you will make sure you do with the lining. You can absolutely use a 1/2 inch seam allowance if you want. I'm going to use a healthy 1/4 inch seam allowance, both on my bag and my lining because I need to keep them the same size. So I'm going to box this corner right now with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to reinforce that too. Lift up and make sure that's fully open. Now I'll go back and do the other side. I believe I already have that. So let's just repeat that. In fact, this time, let's see if maybe pressing that seam open is a little bit of an easier, so I'm not hanging on to quite so much while I'm at the sewing machine. Let's see if that makes a difference for us. Pressing that, and let's get the other seam open too. When you know that you're going to be pressing your seams open, you might want to use a shorter stitch length. Typically, when we quilt, see already that seam's opening. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually shorten my stitch length a little bit and make that so that I have more stitches per inch. This is the real life stuff of making projects. All of a sudden the seams start opening up. What do? Just go re-secure that, shorten your stitch length, do what you need to do to make that be secure. Certainly don't want these little bags to fall apart once these kids start using them. So I'm going to open that up with my iron. I like how that's laying open without me having to be kind of fussing with it. That's cool. So you see how now I'm just going straight across and I'm going to put a pin right in that joint so that those don't move. And I'm going to put it on this side, not the other side, so I can leave the pin in while I'm sewing. Because you could be pinning out here, but as you come down with your 1/4 inch, you'll have to remove the pins. If I pin here, I don't have to ever take the pins out until the project is off the sewing machine. Just something to think about. Tammy taught me that trick. I had always pinned on the opposite side, and when she first came aboard here at Shabby, she always pinned. I'm like, what are you doing? And then I figured out the wisdom was it's just a better way to get it done. Okay, I have my 2 box corners at this point. Part's starting to look pretty cute already. I don't know if the overhead camera can see that. So what's next? Let's just take a look at our pattern here. We have our bag ready to go. Now we have to prepare our handles. So let's just put that portion aside for now. The pattern has you cutting 2 strips, 4 inches by 40 inches for your strips. And I've got that prepared ahead of time. The first thing they're having you do with that 4-inch strip is simply fold that in half and press. You're going to establish the middle. Then, once you open that up, you have a nice kind of guidance of how to fold that side to the middle and press, and that side to the middle and press. So let's go do that now till it's fully pressed. I started on that end so we wouldn't be doing so much together as far as pressing, but I wanted you to see how it is quite easy to make the straps if you pre-fold your fabric in half and then just fold toward the center. It's pretty straightforward. Now the next thing the pattern has us doing is folding this in half again, and this would create the strap. The pattern included instructions to not only use the fusible fleece as a lining to the bag itself, kind of a supporting structure of the fusible fleece, but it also had you cutting some fusible fleece strips to put inside this handle. I don't think it's absolutely necessary, but if you want to go ahead and do that, I'll show you exactly how I would recommend doing it, which I think is slightly different than the pattern. The pattern does mention to press one piece of the fusible fleece inside the folded handle, but my thought was if I have a piece of fleece and I put it inside my folded handle here, when I fold that, I could potentially be seeing that. So my thoughts are if you do decide you want to put the fusible fleece, I would recommend you open that up, and you can see how you kind of have these 2 lanes right here. Pick your favorite lane, and you could iron the fusible fleece here. Then it's completely hidden. You don't have to worry about that kind of squeezing out or kind of showing. So you go ahead and iron that all the way down. Then, as you can see, when you bring this together, now that's not going to be poking out. And you'll simply sew 1/8 of an inch here and 1/8 of an inch here to make your handles. I've done that ahead of time, so let me go ahead and bring that out. So here are the 2 handles, and the pad, you can imagine, this is a really long handle. You can make this any length you want, and it's going to depend on your little trick-or-treater, how long you want that to be. We went ahead and made ours 30 inches. That seemed to be a good height for us. You can use a rotary cutter or just cut those off. Cut them at the same time so you absolutely know they're the same length. Per our instructions, it's guiding us to cut the handle strips to the desired length to make 2 handles. We've done that. Pin 1 handle to the front of the bag. So let's go ahead and turn the bag through right now to the front side. And there's having us pin those handles 4 inches from each side. See our cute box corners? And we box corners because it helps a bag kind of have a base. So laying that down, these are our side seams. We can measure in 4 inches and have a little mark, and we know our friction pen will disappear. So I'm going to measure in 4 inches and mark. I might even just put that in place right now. And I'm going to put that where that's my 4 and that part is inward. And I'm going to lift that up so I'm only pinning to one layer of the bag. Now this is very important. You do not get a twist in the handle. You can imagine if you twist this right now, you would not notice it. So make a deliberate point of wrapping that around so there's no twist. Let's come in 4 inches from the side and get my side seam. It's about right there. I'm just going to put that handle right there and pin. I think I'm going to repin this over here. I like a pin on both sides. I don't want the strap to twist because the next step, we're going to do the other side as well. We're going to be putting the lining on, and we're very close to having our bag completely done. So we don't want to mess up that step. I think we can even skip marking it. We'll just put our ruler on, our 4. There's my spot. I'm going to double pin it. Let's measure over here. There's my 4. Make sure you don't have your twist. And the last check I'm going to do is, how do I look front to back? See how those are lined up? I think we did a good job of measuring in, because we can imagine if this handle, the bag is going to be cattywampus. So you see how those are stacked on top of each other? That's exactly what we want. We don't have a twist in our handle, so that's your final check before we're going to be working with the lining. Now let's look back at our pattern. Pin one handle to the front of the bag, measuring 4 inches from each side. We just did that. Repeat with the second handle on the back bag. We did that. Make sure the handles are hanging down the right side of the bag while assembling. So we checked that, they're hanging down. Place the bag with handles right sides together with the lining. So think about that. This is our lining, that's the right side, and this is the right side. This isn't going to feel natural to you. We're going to actually put this inside here. Feels weird, huh? But it's going to work. Remember how we left this opening in our lining? Remember that? It's all going to be turning through that opening. See my side seams right here? Let's line up our side seams. There's the side seam for my bag. And even if I want to give a little press right there to help define that space, and the side seam for my bag, and we're going to pin that. And we're going to pin all the way around so our bag is lined up. The sides meet the sides. And we'll go all the way around. And I actually like to pin the 2 sides because they have to meet. That has to happen. So I pin what's mandatory and I make the rest of the bag kind of work. So that needs to work for sure. Then we simply go around and we'll put in a few pins. Now we know that's where our handle is. I'm definitely going to pin a pin right here. This is going to remind me, and I'm going to put it out this way. It's going to remind me this is where my handles are, because I'm gonna feel a big bump. Like when I come along, I'm gonna feel resistance here. This starts giving me a clue. I'm at where my handles are going to be. That's just something I've kind of learned along the way. It's kind of a heads up to myself that something significant is happening here. I pin differently in those places to remind myself. So let's do the same on this side. Let's go get that. Where's my bump? It's going to be here. Let's pin differently. Let's have our little flag. It reminds us something's going to happen right there. We're going to have a handle again. And one more pin. Now let's take that to the sewing machine. So I know I have a handle coming, right? I have my little flag. I'm not surprised right now. So we have another handle coming. So we have our opening. This is where we're going to turn everything through and we're going to see our bag. This is my favorite magic trick. I can see where there's a lot of bulk coming through that opening. I can see where maybe leaving maybe a 5-inch opening would be just a little bit easier. You don't want to rip this fabric, which the more tension, obviously, the more likely you will potentially have a rip. And I'll remove those pins where those handles were. Forgot to do that. Keep pulling through. There we go. Now, before I push the lining into the inside of the bag, I need to close that opening. So I'm just going to turn that down. I can either finger press it, I can use my iron. I'll just do that. And it's on the inside of the bag. I don't think you have to get fancy. The whole goal is to simply close that up. Let's just go do that real fast. What I do is I kind of come in, I kind of feather into it, sew it, and kind of feather out. Here's my ending out here. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to reinforce that. I'll just come parallel it. And my opening ends right there. I'll put my finger there. And then I just kind of feather out of it. Okay. Now, as you expect, you'll simply put the lining inside the bag. One extra step, and I don't know that they actually mention this in the pattern itself, is I really love top stitching kind of as a final, it just kind of finishes off a bag, and it also just gets this whole thing kind of secured inside. And that's where you would just take this to the sewing machine once you have everything inside exactly where you want it to be. And you just take this to the sewing machine, and again, I can even just show you where I'd sew. I'll just start that process, but we don't have to finish it. I just come in, and I'd be using an orange or a black thread at this point. I wouldn't be using the white. And just come in and just complete that. It just kind of has a nice dress-up look at the very end. And it just kind of locks that lining into the bag, and you would continue on that all the way around. So I just love, you know, the little ones aren't going to be trick-or-treating forever. It's fun to just have a lot of celebration of when they're little and they get to go trick-or-treating. I really thank you for letting me show you this cute little bag today. Hopefully you'll subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're always coming up with new projects, DIY, new tutorials, and more. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next time.